to the Burrow. This is going to be the first in what we hope will be a series of videos explaining the rules of the Burrows and Badgers skirmish game. We were going to start with movement, as that's one of the key elements of the game, but then it occurred to us that before you begin, you need a warband. So we've decided to start with discussing how you create your warband for Burrows and Badgers. So, first thing you need is a rule book, because that gives you all the rules you need to play and to set up. You'll also need some miniatures. I've already got a set picked out here. I usually like to have around 6 miniatures in a warband, but I tend to find that when I've bought equipment and things for them, I can usually only fit 5 in, so that's what I've got here. I'd suggest having a piece of paper and a pen handy too, although you will eventually put your chosen warband down on a warband roster sheet. When you're working it out, you'll change things around, you might choose different animals or different equipment levels, trying to get down to the correct number of pennies for your warband, so it's best to have a piece of paper to make notes on instead to start with. So how does it begin? Well, every warband in Burrows and Badgers, when you're playing a campaign, starts with 350 Northumbrian pennies. That's your budget. You've got 350 pennies to work with, and from that you've got to buy the animals in the warband, any spells that they've got, and any equipment that they've got. So you've got to try and budget it all in. So to start with, you go to your rulebook and you'll turn to page 37. That's where we begin, in the warband section. You'll find warband roster sheets will be at the back of the book. If you can photocopy that, or you can just download a PDF copy from the Burrows and Badgers Facebook group or from the Burrows and Badgers site. There's a couple of versions there. There's the official one for the back of the rulebook, and there's another version that gets slightly more characters per sheet if you don't want as many bits of paper floating around. So, where do you need to start? Well, every warband has to have at least 3 characters. You've got a minimum of 3 and a maximum of 10. Extremely unlikely that you're going to need to worry about the maximum when you're setting up your warband. You just won't have the budget for it. But you'll need at least 3. And one of those has to be your leader, and one of those has to be your second. Every warband has to have a leader, a second, and at least 1 warband member. Now, when choosing your warband members, you also have to take into account the size of the models. Now, a lot of the small and medium models come on a 30mm base, then you've got large models on a 40mm base, or the massive models come on a 50mm base. When you're choosing your warband, you can have a maximum of 6 on a large base and a maximum of 3 on a massive base. Again, generally when you're starting out, that won't be that much of a concern because you just won't have the budget to pay for them anyway. One of the first things that I would recommend you do when you're starting a new warband is choose the allegiance. Now, every warband has an allegiance. You'll find that on page 47 of the rulebook. There's 4 allegiances. There's Royalists, Wild Beasts, Free Beasts, and Rogues. And each of them gives you a slightly different feel to your warband. Royalists have more access to heavy weapons and armour, and they're better trained at fighting. They get bonuses to their strike stat. The Wild Beasts have the ability to move at will through difficult terrain. They don't have to worry about difficult terrain tests. Doesn't sound great, but when you're actually playing, it can make a huge difference to the options you've got on the tabletop. Free Beasts have access to rare items. They've got fingers in pies, if you like, and they can get access to special things. So you'll start, as a Free Beast warband, you'll start with better equipment than most others. And then the Rogues, well, they're really good at hiding. They get bonuses to their concealment stat. They make really good. If you think of Robin Hood and his merry men hiding in the greenwood, that's your kind of rogues characters. And they also get bonuses to their fate points, so that helps them benefit from luck, if you will, as the campaign goes on. So generally you choose your allegiance to suit the style of warband you're looking for. I'm going for Royalists for these guys. Again, they're not actually Royalists. I'm just choosing that allegiance because I think it suits the type of warband I want. I want them to have heavy armour, I want them to be good at fighting. So that Royalist allegiance gives me those rules options, even though I don't actually want them to be supporters of the crown. So that's the allegiances. Again, page 47, have a look, choose the options, pick the type you want, because it'll make a difference to the way you choose your characters and equip them too. Now, in a campaign game, every warband also has a den to call their home, and these dens give certain bonuses. Now what you'll find is the type of den you get depends on the type of allegiance you've chosen. So once you've got your allegiance, you'll be able to choose a den from that. That's not really something you need to worry about too much now. It only comes into play once you're into the campaign. When choosing your allegiance, as well as deciding what kind of den your warband has and what kind of bonuses your warband gets, it also determines what kind of magic they have access to. There's 6 different types of magic, but each of the allegiances only has access to 4 of those types of magic. So if you want dark magic, then you've got to make sure you pick the right allegiance to get that, for example. So when you're choosing your warband, where you need to go is pages 43 and 44 in the rulebook. What you'll see there is a listing of all the statistics of the different races, including the pennies cost, how much you have to pay to hire them into your warband, and all their different stats, which shows you the things they're good or bad at. Listing their movement, their strike, their block, all basically the things that you need to use them in the game. And the important one for this is their pennies cost, obviously. I'm picking a hare as my leader, so if I've got this right, here's 53 pennies. You can see that there on the page. So to hire him, it's going to cost me 53 pennies. So I'll mark that down on my sheet of paper. That's not all though, because although I've hired him for 53 pennies, he can't play the game just as he is. He needs some equipment. And you'll need to turn to pages 98 and 99 to find the equipment list. Generally speaking, you don't have to worry too much about what equipment's on the model. It would be great if you could represent exactly what was on the model all the time, but things change so much in a campaign game as you get new equipment, new weapons, change the members of your warband, or they get injuries and things that you can't always represent it. So just choose the equipment you think suits your warband. Now when you're equipping your warband members, you need to make sure that everyone in the warband either has a weapon, an item of equipment, or a spell. No one can join the warband and have no gear at all, so you can't just pad your warband out with loads and loads of characters to get the maximum number of activations. So everyone has to have something. Now when you're on page 43 and 44 looking at the different species, one thing to remember is some of them are marked as rare. Now when a creature is marked as rare, you can only have one of those in your warband at a time. You can have any number of rare creatures, but only one of each species. So for example, green lizard is marked as rare, so you can only have the one green lizard. You could also have a raccoon in there who's marked as rare too. You could have both of them in your warband, but you couldn't have, say, 2 green lizards or 2 raccoons. There are other options as well for warbands. One of them that a lot of people like to do, I'm not a huge fan myself, they'd like to choose the single species warband option. Now, the disadvantage to the single species warband option is that all of the characters you pick have to be of the same species. So everyone in your warband has to be a mouse, for example, or everyone in the warband has to be a badger. The disadvantage there, obviously, is that you're restricted on the types of skills you get. You won't have anyone who can fly, for instance, or you wouldn't have any moles who could do tunneling, things like that. The bonus to offset this we give is that they get extra skills. And you'll find single species warbands are on page 46 of the rulebook. Gives you the information there, tells you what extra skills you get. So that's an option you might want to look at. But I would say when you're starting out, just go for a regular normal warband. Now your leader and your second are important members of your warband, so they both get starting bonuses. Now they both get a free skill, so you can go through the skills section of the rulebook and choose a free skill to give to each of those. It could be any of the skills. You could choose a shooting skill or a cunning skill. Whatever you pick, your characters start with that. So one for your leader and one for your second. In addition, your leader, being a noble hero of many years standing, also gets a free stat advance. So pick one of his statistics and increase that by 1 dice level. As an example, you might have a strike stat of D8, so you'd upgrade that to a D10. One important thing to remember is that no stat can ever be above D12 at the start. So if you use your leader's stat upgrade to increase, say, from a D10 to a D12, you couldn't then use any bonuses you got from your allegiances to increase it beyond that. Magic users, spellcasters. How many of those can you have in your warband? Who gets to be one? That's a question we often get asked. Well, the answer is quite simple. You can have as many as you like. You can have everyone as a magic user or no one as a magic user. It's pretty straightforward. You just choose which of your characters you want to be magic users. I've only gone for the one here. I've picked this squirrel. She's going to be my magic user. What happens is you simply decide that character will be a magic user, and then you're going to buy them spells. Now, it sounds great because anyone can cast spells, but it does come with a downside. For every spell you take, you have to pay 5 pennies. And for every spell you take, the character suffers weak 1 and delicate 1. Now those are, well, technically skills. They have negative effects. They make you worse at hitting things in combat and more likely to suffer injuries. So you could take a very powerful magic user at the start, give them all 6 spells from their chosen field of magic, but they would also be extremely weak and extremely delicate. So they die very easily. So while it can be a good idea to start with a few spells, give you plenty of options, it can be risky. And later in a campaign, as you get the option to take new spells, they don't come with that penalty. So it can be better long term to hold on and learn more spells as you go further on in the game. So anyone can be a magic user, you've just got to pay the required penalties. So here's my example warband, Grimnir's Freeblades. As I said, I went for the Royalist Allegiance because of the benefits of the strike stat that can give you. There's a couple of things you'll notice there, warband rating and fate points. We've not discussed those, but I'll mention them later on. First of all, I had to choose my leader and my second. Now for the leader, I went for a hare. Hares have a solid stat line, they're good at most things, particularly at fighting. And although they're quite expensive, 53 pennies for a basic hare, and I also paid out for a hand weapon for him for another 8 pennies, heavy armour, 25 pennies, and a talisman for another 4 pennies to try and keep him alive. So it's quite expensive, 90 pennies all up. I used the leader stat upgrade to increase his block from D8 to D10, and also because he's a leader he gets an extra skill, and so I chose the enduring skill. Once more it'll help him stay alive in combat. Finally, I used the Royalist strike upgrade to increase his strike from D10 to D12. For my second, I chose Nate the Wanderer, a mouse. Not quite the same stat line here. Mice are an awful lot weaker. They are a lot cheaper too though, 24 pennies for a mouse. I again bought him a hand weapon, but I also got him light armour and a light shield to increase his block ability. And because he's my second, I was also able to give him a skill. I gave him Shield Master once again to help with his blocking, to try and help keep him alive in a fight. And I used my other Royalist strike increase to increase him from D6 to D8 strike. Now the next 2 members of the warband were nothing complicated, just straightforward characters. There's no bonuses or anything. Black Bart the Otter, he's got a standard otter stat line. Again, otters aren't cheap, 51 pennies, and his equipment, a cutlass and a pistol, takes him up to 74 pennies. But it does give me a little bit of ranged ability. And the same with Vargo Grum the Weasel. A cudgel and a blunderbuss, just to give me a bit more shooting, so I've got something I can use from a distance. And of course, as a weasel, he gets the Fearless skill, which is always helpful if you're going up against big scary monsters like badgers or wildcats. The last warband member is Amber Fierceheart the Squirrel. Now she's going to be my mage. I chose a squirrel because she gets Fortitude of D8, which is not bad at all, and quite helpful when it comes to casting certain types of spells. And also with that in mind, I bought her a Mage's Focus. Now they're not cheap, 15 pennies a piece, but they do really help you get those spells off when you need them. And speaking of spells, I went for the natural magic list, and I chose 2 spells from it, Haste and Cure, both spells that are good at boosting other members of your warband. Sadly, because she's got 2 spells, it's cost me 10 pennies, and she's also weak 2 and delicate 2, so I'm going to try and keep her away from the enemy as much as I can. With the last 4 pennies, I bought her a talisman, just to try and help keep her alive. Okay, touching on fate points, we'll hear more about those in later videos, but each warband starts with 10 of them, and the warband rating is basically a measure of how powerful your warband is in relation to other warbands. You'll find the information about it on page 102. It's quite straightforward to work out, but it will change from game to game as your warband changes. If you ever come up against a warband that has a much higher warband rating than yours, then you'll get bonus fate points to help balance that out.